This week, I became more of a Vic Fangio supporter than I have been in the past. I'm going to tell you why, coming up on this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Eagles fans, to this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm your host, Louis DiBiase. You can find my work also over at Bleacher Report. On today's edition of Locked On Eagles, I'm going to tell you why this week made me a little bit more of a Vic Fangio supporter than I have been over the last few months. Plus, the Eagles made a signing, adding more depth to their offensive line. I like the move. We'll get into that. And Justin Jefferson signed a historic contract. I'll tell you how that impacts the Eagles. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 back with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. I don't want to say that I was a Vic Fangio hater when they did bring him in as the Eagles' new defensive coordinator. I really like his scheme. It has a lot of success throughout the years across NFL circles, not just with Fangio's defenses, which have been consistently top 10. Like, he has a really great resume as a defensive mind, but other coaches across the league, including in Philadelphia the past 4 years, have tried to replicate Fangio's defense, or at least some sort of hybrid version of it, with a lot of its core principles being in place. Like, Jonathan Gannon is a Fangio disciple. You look at Sean Desai's defense to a degree, not Matt Patricia, but Gannon and Desai had a lot of Vic Fangio's defense in their scheme. So across the NFL, he kind of is like a godfather of coverage. And when it comes to schematic football on the defensive side of the ball, there's not many defensive minds across the league right now that have been as influential as Fangio. So in that way, I totally understood bringing him in. They wanted more of an experienced coach to help Nick Sirianni to be the head coach of the defense, basically. They went with the new first-time coordinator in Sean Desai, and that really didn't work out. Jonathan Gannon was a success, I would say, although, again, he was the reason you didn't win a Super Bowl 2 years ago, in my opinion. But for the most part, 2021, 2022, that was a pretty successful run for Gannon as a DC. It helped him get a head coaching job in Arizona. However, you probably wanted a more experienced, older guy like Fangio as well, who's not going to be looking for a head coaching job anytime soon. That might be a part of it as well. So you have some more continuity on that side of the football schematically and just from any standpoint. Like, they want a stable guy, especially when you have an offensive mind. So you want that stable DC presence like you did with Jim Schwartz for all those years. So, overall, I thought Fangio was a good signing. I wasn't upset or mad about it, but I did have my reservations. I was a little nervous that an older school head coach, or I should say coordinator, former head coach like this might have some stubbornness in him, might not be willing to change his ways as often as a newer coach trying to prove that he belongs in the league. And I was nervous about that from a schematic standpoint because he has such a famous scheme that he wouldn't really be willing to change it much regardless of personnel, regardless of matchup. You see that across the league throughout NFL history, that some coaches are like, we saw that in Philadelphia with Chip Kelly as the head coach. That dude was never going to change his scheme or his plays regardless of the personnel. He thought anybody would fit in that offense. It's why he went from Deshaun Jackson, Jeremy Maclin, Michael Vick, LaShawn McCoy to Sam Bradford and DeMarco Murray and Jordan Matthews and Miles Austin. It was a disaster. And because Chip Kelly kind of had that in him, and I was a little nervous about that with Fangio. And then you hear some former players that are very prominent players on past defenses of his, like the Miami Dolphins with Javon Holland, and you look at Jalen Ramsey kind of talking about how Fangio didn't put them in the best position to succeed and make plays. And there's, of course, like the practice stuff, how he really likes the old school practice schedule. And I thought to myself, is that going to work with a younger team? The modern day athlete might not go for that style of coaching. It's not normally what I prefer either in my football coaches. So there were a lot of those kind of reservations that I had with this guy. But I will say he has a quote from a story that was done on Fangio in the Philadelphia Inquirer that made me believe even more. And one thing that was already pushing me towards really being on board with this hiring was the endorsement he got from a lot of the young core pieces the last 2 weeks in their press conferences, like Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, and then a veteran like Darius Slay, who has a history in the past of not always getting along with his defensive head coach or coordinator, i.e. Matt Patricia in Detroit. So to hear Darius Slay talk him up as well, that's really good to know. That was something already that made me feel better about this move. And then I saw this quote, and this really made me feel a lot more comfortable, because you guys know me. I'm somebody that likes to fit the scheme to the talent, because I think that's how you make sure you maximize your personnel more. And I think that's how you don't miss out on the best players, just acquiring the best players regardless of scheme. Like, obviously, you don't draft a guy or sign a player to a big contract or a high pick if you know they're just not going to fit at all. But to me, you don't take or prioritize a player based on schematic fit over talent. I want my coaches to get the best talent in-house, or the GM, and then the coaches, they maximize, like, how do I get all of this great talent? How do I combine that all into a scheme that makes sense in all three phases, right? And so hearing Fangio with this quote kind of got me back on board. And let me read this one. Quote, "We have a system that is versatile. We like to think. It needs to be versatile because every week you're facing different strengths of an offense, different schemes. So what you play in 1 week, 10, 15 times, you may not play that at all the following week. You have to have a versatile system for the offense today in the NFL. What we'll eventually do is learn what our guys are best at." I love hearing that. That is exactly what I want. He has the pieces to be versatile. He has a lot of young talent. Figure out what they do best and then say, that's how we're going to run this defense. If Quinyon Mitchell is better playing off-zone coverage, we want him on the field because he's our best corner. That's what we're going to do. Or, hey, these guys are better at bump and run, press man coverage, then that's what we're going to do. Or something that has to do with the defensive line as well. Like, hey, Nolan Smith, he's not great at dropping back in coverage. Bryce Huff, he's not really the run stopper we thought maybe he can be. We're going to use them in a way where they're just pass rushers. Like, this is a problem the Eagles have run into in the past. You look at Rasul Douglas, one of my favorite players ever in Philadelphia, that just never got the ability to show his true talent that he's been showing now in Green Bay, Carolina, and Buffalo for the last 4 or 5 years, because Jim Schwartz always asked him to play on an island in cover 1, off cover 3, where he either had to press or play, close man coverage to the line of scrimmage without getting his hands, without it being jam press, trying to shadow a guy like Amari Cooper, and there's no safety over top. Like, that was a problem. Rasul Douglas didn't fit that scheme, and it made Jim Schwartz not really trust him. And then he went on to have a lot of success elsewhere. And instead, he prioritized players that were better scheme fits. And that's always the comparison, or the analogy. No, the comparison is the right word for that I always look to when it comes to this, scheme versus personnel kind of football philosophy talk. And so to me, that's how you go about coaching. And it's great to hear that that's what Fangio is going to do. And he has the pieces this year to be versatile. Like, you look at Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, for instance. That dude has played every position in the secondary. He can play deep safety. He can play in the box. He can play as a slot corner. I think Cooper DeJean's going to be able to do the same thing. You look at Reed Blankenship. He has some versatile abilities. Sidney Brown last year played in the slot, mostly played deep safety at Illinois. Has the range to do both things, has the tackling ability, I think, to play in the box. Josh Sweat can play inside and out. Same with Brandon Graham. Milton Williams has experience playing defensive end and defensive tackle. All of Jalen Carter can do that too. Like, he has a lot of pieces that can do it all. Avonte Maddox, you look at, he's already using him as a hybrid third safety slot corner. Isaiah Rodgers, I think, has the right talent to be able to play both inside and outside, although he's mostly been an outside corner when he's with the Colts. Like, he has the personnel to do exactly what he's talking about. And to hear him say it, though, put it into words, like, that's awesome to hear. And not just that he's going to maximize what his best players do best, but also that, hey, my defense is going to look different this week against the Dallas Cowboys compared to the following week when we play, like the Jacksonville Jaguars. One team might do something better than the other, which calls for a different scheme, like it calls for different personnel. I love hearing that. Like, it has to be ever changing. It can't be black and white. And I think sometimes coaches just believe in their scheme so much, or what they do best so much. And again, yes, like, you want to have those core beliefs. And I think Fangio's defense overall, like his main scheme, has had a lot of success across the NFL. But I don't like the black and white of it's my way or the highway. This is how we're going to do it. And if you don't like that, if you don't fit that, I'm going to get in players that will, regardless of the talent difference. So to me, I think it's really ever since Chip Kelly left that's been ingrained in my brain how I want this team to approach things. And then Doug Peterson emphasized that belief when he had success with that. Same with Nick Sirianni. That's the kind of coach I want. Vic Fangio, as the last few weeks have gone on and on, I'm warming up to this guy more and more being the Eagles defensive coordinator. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, the Eagles made a move. Howie Roseman, it's always Howie's season. I like the depth piece they added for the offensive line. We'll get into who that is and where the fit is coming up next. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, the Stanley Cup, the NBA Finals. We are set. The Dallas Mavericks against the Boston Celtics, the Edmonton Oilers against the Florida Panthers. That's a fun Final Four in the big two of the NBA and NHL, the spring playoffs in pro sports. You're going to get a great shot with FanDuel to bring home a big win of your own with both leagues. Right now, new customers get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 back to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. I'm going to bet a lot on the Oilers. I really want to see Connor McDavid get a Stanley Cup. I'm going to bet on the Dallas Mavericks. I'm feeling that Kyrie Doncic backcourt gives me those LeBron Kyrie Cavalier vibes. I'm in on Dallas and Edmonton. You can get over to FanDuel, win big, get $150 back to bet on it all by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Got to turn on the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Eagles made a move on Monday, signing to a one-year contract, a former second-round pick back in 2019. He's an interior offensive lineman that had some success with both the Houston Texans and the Cincinnati Bengals. He's got 35 career starts under his belt. It's Max Scharping. So this is a player that is not just some random throwaway signing. Like, this is going to be a guy I think that makes the roster, and I don't think he's going to start. But he could be one of the first guys up if Tyler Steen gets injured or he doesn't perform or Landon Dickerson has an injury or for some reason Cam Jurgens, something happens at center and Matt Hennessy's got to move in at center. And, again, something happens there where he was the right guard and not Steen. I don't know what happens. Or maybe Steen moves to right tackle because Lane Johnson gets hurt. Regardless, I think Max Scharping is going to be one of the first call-ups on the interior of the offensive line. He's got the versatility to play both right guard and left guard. So the past 2 years, he's been mostly a right guard, 219 snaps there in 2022, 661 snaps at right guard back in 2021. Before that, he played 447 left guard snaps in 2020. He played over 1,000 snaps at left guard back in 2019. So if Landon Dickerson gets hurt, this could be a guy that fills in. Pretty much, he's going to be one of your primary top 2, top 3 backups for Steen, Dickerson, and Jurgens. I would still imagine Matt Hennessy is your #1 backup for center and guard. But I will say I think Scharping is right there. I mean, he was a playoff starter with the Cincinnati Bengals back in 2022 when they made a deep run all the way to the AFC Championship. So this isn't just some random guy. Like, his PFF grades are kind of whatever, but for another depth piece, like to get this guy June 3rd, a former second-round pick only from 5 years ago, I'll take that to have Jeff Stoutland get his hands on this player and help with just another backup develop. Between, you look at Scharping now, Matt Hennessy, Tyler Keegan, Mekhi Becton, Dylan McMahon, Fred Johnson, the Eagles suddenly have really solid offensive line depth. And I was a little bit nervous because when they let Sua Opeta go in free agency, they let Jack Driscoll go. They did bring in Matt Hennessy, but at that point they didn't have Keegan, they didn't have Scharping, they didn't have Becton, they didn't have McMahon. All they had basically as backups were Hennessy and Johnson. So now suddenly you have like 5-6 players that I think Stoutland can really make a couple of them be productive players. And Jeff Stoutland has such a good track record. Like how many, yes, there's been guys like, I forget his name, Jamon Brown back in 2020 that was a disaster. But there really haven't been many depth pieces that when they're on the field for the Eagles on the offensive line that were just unplayable. Like even so, like yeah, Jack Driscoll had his struggles at right tackle. You know, you think of the Saints game back in 2022. You know, that's a guy that he had some brutal games. Andre Dillard had some brutal games. Matt Pryor, you know, had his bad moments. So did Sua Opeta. But all of those players came in and for the most part played pretty serviceable football to the point where, yeah, maybe you're not winning because of those guys, but you're not losing because of them. You're not winning in spite of them. Like Jack Driscoll for a while was a solid rotational backup right when he had to play the guard spots. Like I thought he held his own. Outside of that Saints game, I thought he was okay at times at right tackle. He was never Lane Johnson, but he had his moments. I think these guys, there's 5 or 6 of them, at least 2 or 3, I think are going to be able to play. Maybe all of them. I mean, that's how good Jeff Stoutland is, and I loved hearing him at his press conference today talk about, you know, like it makes sense why he has the resume he does with late round picks becoming stars like Jordan Mailata, or just at the worst, they're a very solid backup like a Halapuli Vadi Vaitai or Matt Pryor, and then those guys go on to get starting jobs elsewhere, getting bigger contracts. Andre Dillard, too, got paid in Tennessee. It didn't work out, obviously, but Jeff Stoutland, he's got Jeff Stoutland to thank for that. He got that man paid and got him another chance to start at left tackle in another league or on another team. And so for me, like you hear Stoutland today talk about how he loves an interactive offensive line room. Like he wants his guys to talk about plays that they love, and they start just brainstorming ideas for certain play designs on a whiteboard. And then a lot of the times those plays, they're actually used on game day, and it makes the offensive linemen want to interact even more and want to develop. And suddenly these players, their intelligence grows and their development continues because Jeff Stoutland just has it figured out. And I think Max Scharping is another guy. Just get more players in here for Stoutland to get his hands on, and especially like players that were top draft picks. Stoutland, again, has a great track record for, you know, again, maximizing day 3 picks, day 2, day 3, undrafted players as well. That one undrafted kid, I'm blanking on his name, but the kind of length and size he has too, there's a lot of pieces here to be excited about in training camp. And that was not a reality about a month ago. Before the draft, they looked really thin when it comes to depth of the offensive line. It's why I was convinced they were going to draft a lineman in the first 2-3 rounds. And they waited, but with Stoutland, you have that flexibility. And, you know, the board just didn't fall that way for tackles and guards. And so in June, you pull out a Max Scharping kind of signing. And I think this is good. It's not great, but it's a pretty solid move for this late into the offseason. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, got some Justin Jefferson talk for you. I want to talk about how his historic contract got me thinking about the Eagles, so we'll get into that coming up next. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time makes it easy getting NBA Finals tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets, plus NFL tickets as well. The schedule is out. Where are you going on the road for the Philadelphia Eagles? What games in the link are you going to? Get them through Game Time, where you can save up to 60% buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Plus, you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know you're getting a great view on top of the great prices. Game Time will get you the lowest price guaranteed, or they will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets for the NBA Finals, the NFL, and more with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create that account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so Justin Jefferson signed the biggest contract in NFL history, I believe, for a non-quarterback, $110 million guaranteed. He's averaging $35 million a year. Like, this guy is getting paid almost like a quarterback, which is not surprising considering his track record through his first 4 years of his career. It's not surprising considering the wide receiver market is blowing up. Every team needs and knows that they need to have these star players at this position. It helps quarterbacks take a huge step. You throw the football more now than ever in NFL history. Like, having a guy, especially that's versatile, like Justin Jefferson, who can play inside and out, one of the best route runners in the league. Like, you don't let this guy leave the building when you've got him. And so I have a few thoughts here that kind of have to do with the Eagles when it comes to Jefferson's signing. Number one, yet again, not that Devontae Smith was going to get a contract close to Justin Jefferson, but Jefferson getting $35 million a year. You look at what A.J. Brown's getting, and Nico Collins, Amon-Ra, St. Brown, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, who eventually I think will probably get a raise with the Miami Dolphins. Devontae Smith, I hope that he just chose the team-friendly approach and he wasn't getting bad advice about where this market was going. Because if I was Devontae Smith right now, I would be asking for like a restructure already. I don't know. I mean, it's crazy that deal, and again, it's a lot of money, $51 million guaranteed, $24-25 a year. That's a lot of cash for sure. But Devontae could have got more if he waited or if he had a different approach to this. Again, I'm glad from an Eagles perspective that they made out the way they did. Like, they're almost paying A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith guarantee-wise around the same, just a little more than Justin Jefferson, which is for two players. It's I think 25 to 30 million more guaranteed, which is unbelievable. So in that way, it's great for the Eagles, but for Devontae, it's like, man, this dude probably could have got a lot more money, but if he knew that and he chose this route, then hats off to number 6 for sure. The other angle I thought about with the Jefferson signing is, man, that was, when it comes to like non-quarterback moves in a draft, that the pick of Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson is one of the biggest draft blunders in NFL history, not just for the Eagles and franchise history, but outside of like quarterback decisions. Is there a move that it looks worse when it comes to like missing out on a historic player at a position because you drafted another player at that position one pick before that guy? Like, if you can think of another similar comparison to that, hit me up on Twitter at DiBiase LOE. I was trying to think of that, and like, what teams have done that, but then recovered as fast as the Eagles, where within a 2-year span, like normally when you make a historic blunder like that, you don't recover that quick. The Eagles did. They got Devontae Smith the next year and then A.J. Brown the following season. So who has done that where they've taken a player at a certain position and then a pick later, a historic player at that position is taken? And then who has done that and then recovered as well as the Eagles have, where now they have 2 elite players at that position, and it only took them 2 drafts to do that by drafting Devontae Smith and by trading for A.J. Brown? I don't know. Like, I can think of, like, for maybe the Buffalo Bills, they traded the pick to the Kansas City Chiefs in 2017 that ended up being Patrick Mahomes, and then the following year they get Josh Allen. Like, that's as good of a job as you can do for giving up the pick that ended up being a top 3 greatest quarterback of all time. Maybe eventually he'll surpass Brady as the GOAT. Like, maybe that's a good comparison. I don't know. At like a lower level, the Cardinals had a historic bust of a pick at quarterback. Josh Rosen, instantaneously you knew was not an NFL quarterback. And then the next year they get Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray's a pretty solid quarterback that's been to the playoffs a few times, been an All-Pro, multiple-time Pro Bowler, but that's not to the level of what I'm talking about here. But it's crazy the Eagles had such a blunder in NFL history going with Reagor instead of Jefferson and then recovering as fast as they did. So it's like, got to give Howie the blame. But man, again, I've said this on the show before in past years. Howie Roseman is really good at creating messes at times. But man, is he good at cleaning them up. To the point where I watch Justin Jefferson, I see him get this contract, and I feel nothing because the Eagles got their guys paid. So I'm like, props to you, JJ. Like, go get your stuff. It is interesting to see, like, in NFL history or Eagles history, though, the what if of if they took Justin Jefferson, how different things would be. Because, you know, there was a lot of reasons Carson Wentz regressed the way he did. But if the Eagles take Justin Jefferson in the first round that year, Wentz does not regress in 2020 the way he did. Like, there's absolutely no way. Would he have been as good as he was in previous years? Maybe not. Maybe if they still take Jalen Hurts, that pressure, the distraction, the mental hurdle of that still ends up being too much. But Justin Jefferson, probably if he's an Eagle, I would say Carson Wentz still is too. Maybe. And maybe that's not a good thing because Jalen Hurts, look how elite he's been over the last 2 years. And maybe Carson Wentz gets to a certain floor and they keep running it back with him. But even with JJ, it's not enough to get him back to the elite status he was once at. So there's just so many what-ifs with that pick. But overall, I think everything happens for a reason, and the JJ pick not happening has led to a lot of great things for the Eagles, honestly, even if it wasn't like a direct cause of that. It kind of was, though, because it made them be so adamant about getting that position right and not making that mistake again that you got Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. Like, I'd rather have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith than just Justin Jefferson, and then who would have been your wide receiver too at that point? Like some free agent that you signed? Because you would not have taken another receiver probably in the first round if you got JJ. You would not have. The reason you did that with Devontae Smith is because you messed up so badly, and you needed to make sure you gave Jalen Hurts the chance with weapons that you didn't give with Carson Wentz because you missed so badly over and over again. But man, what a contract for JJ, $35 million a year, $110 million guaranteed. I was so wrong. There's players I've been wrong about. I'll never be more wrong about a guy than I was Justin Jefferson. I thought he was going to be a slot-dependent player that was a redundant role player for the Eagles, considering where I thought he would produce in line with Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert and Alshon Jeffrey at the time and a lot of possession players. I was hell-bent on speed, adding speed, as the Eagles were. So it's embarrassing, but I'll own it. I was all in on the Reagor pick, and I was elated that they did not take Justin Jefferson. And look where that is now, for sure. So Justin Jefferson's a great player, but I'm pretty happy with where things ended up for the Philadelphia Eagles. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in and making us your first listen each and every day. We will be back tomorrow. Until then, Lou DiBiase signing off. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening. And let's go, Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.